Good morning, Wabash. This week speaking in Pioneer Chapel is Jon Pactor, class of 1971. He's a solo practicing attorney in Indianapolis where he concentrates his practice on problems caused by negligent or irresponsible lawyers. Giving his talk titled, Wabash, God, and the Old-Time Religion, please welcome Jon Pactor.
Good morning, my young friends of Wabash and some of my friends who aren't so young. The First Amendment of our Constitution guarantees each of us the right to exercise our religion. Now, at my congregation, and maybe at yours, we are often called to stand up and sit down, and stand up and sit down, and stand up and sit down. Well, standing up and sitting down is how I exercise my religion, at least aerobotically. Well, we are here in this historic, venerable chapel. It is almost 90 years old. Often religious services have been conducted here, so this is a fitting venue to talk about God, Wabash, and that old-time religion. I want to start this talk with a little religion in somewhat of a fun way. So I will need your help. So will the Wabash congregation please rise? Thank you. Thank you. Now, one more thing. Will you please clap your hands as loudly as you can? Please be seated, and thank you so much. See, that was a religious experience. I had been praying that I would receive a standing ovation, and you have answered my prayer. And I also won a $50 bet from my wife. But I actually have a serious message today, and about some worries I have. And I'm worried about the decline of character and moral conduct in the upbringing of boys and young men in our country. And I'm concerned about the girls and young women too, but they are just not my topic today. I'm concerned about the lack of good leadership by adult men and the presence of bad messages from them to the boys and young men in our country. The messages are poor, and the role models in the greater American public are pathetic, unless you think that lying, dishonesty in business, cheating in athletics, swindling consumers, covering up the acts of sexual predators, being sexual assailants, gouging consumers, and perverting government is what we want to teach our boys and teach them how to become responsible young men. So I offer you some examples of why I'm worried. These are examples of the problem. They are not the description of the entire problem. I'll start with the men in business. A major corporation, Volkswagen, cheated on emissions control without regard to their purchasers or society's goals of making the air safe for everyone. Perhaps some of the purchasers of Volkswagens financed their cars through the cheats at Wells Fargo. Those corporations were run by men, and men lacking in character and integrity, in my opinion. Facebook, motivated by profits, apparently allowed Russians to damage our democracy. Social media companies profited by allowing hate groups to flourish. Those companies have been controlled by men, in my opinion, lacking in character and integrity. Recently, Equifax's gross negligence led to an enormous hack of supposedly protected information. Earlier in this century, major corporations collapsed after financial improprieties. Consider Enron, Arthur Andersen, Lehman Brothers, and virtually all of the men in charge of these horrendous tragedies have escaped accountability, and too often with golden parachutes. In addition, men in major corporations have engaged in or covered up sexual misconduct. considered Fox News and Uber. Athletes cheat with drugs, and big-time coaches cheat on recruiting or academics. And let's put a spotlight on politics and government. In last year's presidential campaign, most, if not all, of the Republican candidates vying for the highest office of the land engaged in childish name-calling, race-baiting, and insensitive remarks, even to each other on a very wide scale. Who teaches their boys to engage in that conduct? We don't here at Wabash for sure. There are virtually no inspiring role models for boys and young men in our federal government. The lack of morals and moral courage among the men in government is bipartisan. That's the best thing that I can say about it. President Clinton caused a scandal that wasted a vast amount of time and money, and he eroded the public trust. He let down his supporters. I'm not referring to anything he was wearing. And two other presidential candidates, John Edwards and Newt Gingrich, followed with their own Clinton-like practices. One thing I can say about the country's current president is that he doesn't discriminate. He insults everybody: the Pope, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, women, Jews, Muslims, war heroes, generals, gays, Jews, senators of both parties, scientists, and football players. I'm sure that list isn't complete. But who wants their boys and young men to grow up and follow that example of a serial insulter? The House of Representatives, in my opinion, is a house of ill repute. A Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, a man who was constitutionally in line for the presidency, had a dark past of sexual misconduct and was paying hush money. Just this week, a scandal involving Representative Tim Murphy, maybe you heard about it, of Pennsylvania, made the news. Educated, this congressman is a 65-year-old psychologist with a PhD. His website says he attends church with his wife. As a congressman, he advocates for family values and for restrictions on abortions. Yet he had an affair with a 32-year-old married woman, and when they thought she was pregnant, he encouraged her to get an abortion. Representative Murphy has not resigned. He ought to, this minute. The men in the Senate are not worse than the men in the House, but that's not a compliment. The Senate's majority leader was so focused on winning and building his own personal power base that he said his number one goal was to make sure that the president was a one-term president. In that regard, he was referring to the prior president. He seems to be more or less okay with the current one, even though the current president has been baiting North Korea into a war which might involve nuclear weapons. A scintilla of moral courage from the majority leader should be vocal outrage at such actions. But regardless of who the president is, the majority's leader, or whatever party, should not have as number one goal to remove the president. It should be to improving the welfare of all the citizens of the country. For selfish reasons, he did not do his job. Thus, under this leadership, the Senate has virtually accomplished nothing to improve the health care for the citizens of this country. And every person in this chapel has a pre-existing health condition or has a relative or close friend who has one. Health care affects us all. And everyone in this country, except the very wealthy and perhaps the very poor, are only a moment away from financial ruin because of an accident, a crime, or just bad luck, which may force them into the critical need of health care and not being able to afford it. And who might some of those people be? Some of those victims are going to be the victims of the Las Vegas massacre last week, as it is foreseeable that some of them will not have health insurance or will not have enough insurance. And yet the senators have expressed sympathy over the mass shooting. But that appears to me to be fake sympathy by those senators who have stubbornly refused to improve the health care system. And last week, the HHS Secretary, Tom Price, resigned after having run up an estimated cost of $1 million in a few months for flights at taxpayer expenses. He has touted himself as a fiscal conservative, which must mean that he will conserve his own money by slurping at the public trough. He was a graduate of the University of Michigan and its medical school. Those are prestigious schools. He was supposedly independently wealthy. Someone who is trained to, quote, first do no harm, rips off the taxpayers to such an extent that he even repulsed the president. Do we tell our boys and young men to aspire to be the next Tom Price? And men are acting unmanly in other spheres of life. The men who have been leaders in the Catholic Church covered up the crimes of priests who victimized children. As a result, other children were victimized. Charitable donations were diverted to pay legal costs and provide compensations to the victims. Those men in charge let down the devout priests and the religious laymen of their church. They let down the boys and men of every religion. And this, my criticism of those administrators of the Catholic Church, is more about the men part of it. It's not a blemish on the church itself. And let's not forget some other champions of disgrace: Bill Cosby, Lance Armstrong, David Petraeus, Michael Flynn, and Bernie Madoff. And I'm angry because these are not isolated examples by some men. It is a pervasive problem. They surely know better. They are college educated, and many of them had the advantages of religious upbringings, but they have engaged in unethical and immoral conduct repeatedly. Where is their conscience? Men are defaulting on their most important obligations, and I am angry about it, and so should you be. Men should be gentlemen and responsible citizens. I didn't invent that. What does that mean? At a minimum, men should be educated, honest, hardworking, and trustworthy, working for the good of their fellow men and women. They should do their jobs with competency and integrity. They should have a sense of their importance to transmit manly values to boys and young men. My father was a member of the greatest generation. I feel I'm a member of the greatest degeneration. And you, my young friends, you must be determined to be the members of the greatest regeneration. We have to look back to that old-time religion for help. So come with me to a place called Crawfordsville, Indiana. The time is 1832. Wabash College was officially founded on November 21, 1832, by a group of young, devoted Presbyterian ministers. On the following morning, the founders knelt in prayer in the snow to ask for God's help. To modernize that story, the next morning they took a knee in the snow for what they really believed in. And believing in God and believing in themselves, our Wabash forefathers decided to start a college literally in the uncivilized, uncouth, and illiterate part of the western United States. They could have remained in the East, enjoyed comfort and prestige, or they could have returned, but many of them stayed until their death, some almost 50 years later. Crawfordsville was only 12 years old in 1832. There was nothing here to speak of. They had running water, but that was Sugar Creek. They had no students. They had no money. They had no alumni for donations. On the positive side, they didn't have to confront the uncivilized and uncouth DePaul as we do today. Our founders believed in God. Our founders believed in God, and they believed in hard work in order to do good for the masses. Within a year, the founders had their first teacher, Caleb Mills, who came from New England. Before he came, he got married, and his bride and he took a trip here. It took about 6 weeks. I didn't know whether they used the term honeymoon back then, but I have never heard of any newlyweds taking their honeymoon in Crawfordsville. But Mills was just 26 years old, not much older than most of my young friends here today, and he taught the first class in December 1833 of their 12 students. The pioneers who founded the college got some good luck eventually. Through hard work, mostly by Mr. Edmund Hovey, the college raised considerable funds from donors in the East. This was just in the nick of time because the college was so lacking in funds that they were ready to cash in their chips and end the whole enterprise, which may be a poor analogy, gambling analogy to apply to those Presbyterians who opposed gambling. Anyway, those last-minute funds saved the college, literally, from extinction. The forefathers worked to build enrollment in the campus. In the summer of 1838, the first 2 students graduated. One was first in his class, and the other was last in his class. I don't know if they looked at it that way, but so be it. And then the total enrollment at that time in 1838 was getting close to 100 students. They weren't all the college level. There was a preparatory part of it. It was getting close to 100. In the few short years, the founders had been erecting a building, essentially the only building for the campus. and was almost completed. And then, on September 23, 1838, a fire gutted it. The building contained dorms, a library, and a chapel. The fire destroyed the chapel. The fire destroyed the entire library, and the building was inhabitable. The assets of the college at that time were equal about what was owed on the contract to finish the building. Again, the college was economically belly up, but the founders persevered. The building was rebuilt, the college was saved, and although the phrase wasn't used then, Wabash always fights prevailed. So by 1838, our founders were dedicated and disciplined in their work for the public good. The idea of being devoted to worthy principle and to always fight for it is part of our old-time religion at Wabash that benefits us today. We should particularly be inspired by Caleb Mills. He was much more than the first professor at Wabash College. He was seriously dedicated to the cause of free public education in Indiana for boys and for girls. Indiana was so illiterate in the first 50 or so years of the 19th century that the term Hoosier was a synonym for an illiterate nitwit. Inspired by his own belief in God and to do good for the masses, Mr. Mills pushed legislation year after year until in the early 1850s, Indiana adopted a system of free public schools. Though deeply religious, he did not wear his religion on his sleeve. In his advocacy, he stressed the good of the entire public. He said, "The true glory of a people consists in intelligence and virtue of its individual members. And no more important duty can devolve upon the representatives in the legislative capacity than the devising and perfecting a wise, liberal, and efficient system of public education. If done right, religious prejudices would not intervene." He also wrote, "Let us ascertain how many of our youth are deprived of what should be the birthright of all, without distinction of rank or color, the means of an education. Let it be remembered that the safest safeguards of the peace and prosperity of a community must be sought in its intelligence and virtue. The means of securing these and cultivating crystal honesty in the minds of the rising generation should indeed be ample, free, and universal as the air we breathe." He eventually persuaded the legislature to pass the laws that did establish the public education for the good of all citizens of the state. And if you attended any public high school in your county, Lake County, Marion County, Hamilton County, any of the counties in the state of Indiana, you attended something that Caleb Mills started with the public education. Thereafter, in 1856, Caleb Mills delivered an address to the youth of Indiana on the subject of character. He started with these words, "My young friends," which I am using today because it has inspired me. And he said to them, "You will carry with you into another world nothing, absolutely nothing, but your character. To your character is everything, emphatically everything, both for this world and the next." He also explained to them that character is taught and developed over time. The development of character and integrity is part of that old-time religion here at Wabash. It's lost its way elsewhere. So this brings me to the question of what you can do, what Wabash can do, what my fellow alumni and I can do about the problem that so worries me, the problem of raising young men in a society where bad men rule and good men stay quiet. Foremost, we cannot keep quiet about it. Regaling against the likes of those whom I've used as examples today is just insufficient. So I offer the following brief pieces of advice to you, my young friends. Before I do so, I want to say something that may not be regularly heard on college campuses by alumni speakers. And I mean this as much as I can say anything with 100% certainty. I like the students of Wabash College. I like being with them. I like the guts they have. I know their challenges, maybe not all of them. I know they have a lot of challenges. I probably sat in 300 chapter meetings in the last 18 years as a fraternity. I got a sense of that. I know the fellows around the campus. I really like the students here. So any comment I'm making now is from that basis, not a basis of looking down on the students here. So I offer the following pieces of advice. Work at being a gentleman and a responsible citizen. Work at it every day. Character is not built up overnight. It can't be delivered to you like a pizza. Now, you work at your studies, you work hard at the studies, you work hard in the theater, you work hard on the football field and other athletics, you work hard in the glee club. You work in trying to be fit in all those things. Well, work on trying to develop the strength of your character. Think about it. You can do it. I know you can. I've seen it done. Secondly, look to real men for inspiration, men like Caleb Mills and other men in history. Look to people you actually know. Don't defend and certainly don't try to match bad men, even if they have money, fame, or power. A professional athlete, an elected official, a corporate officer, and a clergy should earn your respect. Every Wabash man should earn your respect. Don't just give it away. And make people earn your respect and live your life so that you are earning the respect of others. When times are tough, think about the manly virtue of perseverance. It's one of the points I told you about the story of the founding of the college. They could have cashed in those chips. It would have been easy to do. We learn here to persevere. Don't close your ears to the sound of your own conscience. In a group, you may have to be the man who says, no, we can't do that. And you might have to be the man that has to take the steps, however unpopular, make sure that something isn't done. I don't need to give you any examples here today because I know this community well enough that you can think of many good ones on your own. Think of the greater good of your fellow men and women more so than maybe your own selfish thoughts. You can't be totally without your own selfish thoughts in a sense, and selfish I don't mean totally in a pejorative way, because building up your character is a self-made thing. But if it's all about you, then you're missing the value of an education. I didn't invent that. Caleb Mills didn't invent it. He just lived it in a great example for all of us. Think about your responsibilities more than you think about your rights. Think about your responsibilities more than your rights. You may have the right to free speech. It may be morally wrong to exercise that right. Or you may exercise it in a morally improper way. Be a role model for your younger brothers and your classmates. Actually, I think you're a good role model for the men who are running our corporations, governments, athletics, and religious organizations. I don't mean that to be funny. They can learn a lot from you. Be grateful, and especially be grateful for this college. This is a hard place. Wabash College is hard. It has been said, Wabash won't be easy, but it will be worth it. Men like Caleb Mills knew that from the start, but generations of Wabash men are testament that, yes, it has been worth it. The men and women of the Wabash community care deeply about our students and their development into becoming gentlemen and responsible citizens, becoming men of intelligence and virtue. Because so many people care about you, your family, your friends, the faculty, alumni, and many others, make it your mission not to let them down regarding your character. Before you take any action or decide not to take action, ask yourself, will I be letting somebody down? Will I be hurting someone? Will my actions cause shame on my family, my college, my church, my professors, my civilization? Here's a story about an inspiring Wabash man I want to share with you. His name is Richard O. Ristine, graduated from Wabash in 1941. In 1963, he was lieutenant governor of Indiana. He was a Republican. The governor was a Democrat. I don't think that can happen anymore. At that time, the state needed to raise money. An idea was for Indiana to enact a sales tax. Generally speaking, the Republicans were against it and the Democrats were for it. It came down to the vote in the Indiana Senate. The senators were split. It was a tie. Mr. Ristine, as lieutenant governor, had the duty to break the tie. And he broke the tie and voted for the sales tax, which had been supported by the Democrats. The next year, he ran for governor, and he lost. Some think he lost because he voted for the tax. After he died in 2009, Mitch Daniels, then the governor of the state of Indiana, said that Mr. Ristine personified integrity and lived the humanitarianism that many people merely profess. But for bad timing, said Governor Daniels, he'd have been a great governor. In every way, he was the sort of gentleman that is so sadly rare these days. May someone say about you, each one of you, he personifies integrity and lives the humanitarianism that many people profess today. That should be a major goal of your life and your education here. Now I have a few words from my friends in the administration and faculty. Thank you for your dedication to the high calling of teaching at Wabash College, which has existed since Caleb Mills. Thank you so much for that. Take to heart the words of President Kane in his inaugural address in 1900, when the existence of traditional colleges like Wabash was threatened by the rise of big universities. President Kane said, quote, "The college that recognizes its own place and function is in no danger of being supplanted." President Kane also stated that education depends upon the belief that man has a moral nature and that it needs to be recognized. My friends in the faculty and the administration continue to care like Caleb Mills cared. Continue to expect great things from our students and let them know it. Continue to strive to be wise because we need the wise to teach the potentially wise. And finally, I have a few words for myself and fellow alumni. I'm speaking for myself today. I am confident, however, that most of my friends in the Wabash, men and women in the community share my sentiments. We alumni will continue to recruit students to this incredible community of Wabash men and women. I believe in women. I believe in you, my young friends. I believe in the professors, the coaches, and administrators of this college. I believe in my alumni. Boys who are in high school or younger should want to join our community, want to become Wabash men. Boys today are not much different from boys in the days of Caleb Mills. They want to be inspired to be men of character, to be gentlemen, to be ethical and moral, to be responsible citizens, and to live lives of meaning. Paraphrasing the poet Wordsworth, that which we alumni love, others will love, and we alumni have a moral obligation to teach them how. We don't want to let you down either. So let the Spirit move us, the spirit of that old-time religion as nobly lived by Caleb Mills and Richard Ristine and many others. And whenever we hear the ringing of Mr. Mills' bell again, let us be filled anew by the exemplary life of personal character and the motivation for the public good that is the definition of Caleb Mills. So now, I ask this congregation of Wabash College, assembled in our beloved chapel, to please rise. We stand as different generations of Wabash men and women, linked inseparably to the generations before us, and we stand together literally and figuratively, young and old, men and women, as we must stand together to be dedicated to keeping our college and community strong by insisting on teaching the moral development and character of the young men of Wabash College so that they, with intelligence and virtue, can be inspiring leaders for the betterment of our civilization, and to that, we can all say amen. Thank you.